Hello, we are back for an kind of an interlude in our tarot study series. If you are a follower of my channel, you may have seen some of these videos. I did some major cards through Empress, and then I was on a break for a while, and most recently did the Emperor. And I've been struggling to get the Hierophant video ready to go. I think I mentioned in one of my previous videos that the series was a little bit delayed because I wanted to do some more research, and it's kind of ironic with the Hierophant, which is a card, as we'll learn in the next episode, all about being in your true self and understanding your true wisdom and not relying on too heavily on other teachers. Necessarily. It is funny that I dove into this. I need to read 20 guidebooks before I feel qualified to tell you about the Hierophant. So, tarot folks, you can give a little chuckle at that. But I realized I channeled this need, this feeling that I needed to actually talk first before we jump into the Hierophant about the last two cards, Emperor and Empress, combined. I just had this intuition last night when I was getting a massage that I wanted to talk about this. And so this is going to be about the Empress and the Emperor, and specifically about the topics of showing up, taking up space, the feeling of being too much or maybe not enough, about giving and receiving. Because I think there's something really powerful in these two cards as a pair, and in some way I think it almost helps us get out of the historically gendered natures of these cards by thinking of them as an integrated pair that isn't necessarily first Empress then Emperor. You might, you know, if you think about that order, you might think, why is the male card further along, right? But we know that no cards in the tarot are gendered, that the gendered interpretations of them were in historical context and may apply to specific visuals, but the sole essence of these cards is never male or female, because it integrates all experiences, and so that would not be that would not make any sense if these cards only spoke to certain gendered experiences. So here's where this came from. I was getting this massage last night, and I was thinking about receiving. Whenever I get a massage, do body work, one thing I try to do, kind of like meditate on, because I struggle as a trans person, as a disabled person, with being fully in my body, in this vessel, this form that I have here. Body work is a way for me to get more into it, but it's very easy for me to, being neurodivergent, being ADHD, it's very easy for me to zone out during a massage and be thinking about a million things. So I really try to focus on receiving, and I always bring in the Empress as an ally in this work, and I always kind of try to, just think, okay, receive. We're receiving in the body. And then every time my mind kind of goes off, I come back to receiving in the body, receiving in the body. And I was thinking about how receiving in that way, how dedicating a period of time to receiving, how receiving without necessarily immediately giving. Of course, in this case, I did immediately give money. It was an exchange. But even in other parts of our lives, when we receive things from people in our lives, capitalism teaches us that we immediately have to make it a transaction. It has to be about giving. And even if we don't literally make a transaction, such as a money transaction, we often in our head or kind of have this, even if it's a little subconscious, this feeling of, okay, someone's given me this, I need to give this back, right? And that can take us out of the experience of fully receiving. And that's not to, of course, shame anyone who has this. I have this all the time, but it's a really powerful thing to attempt, at least, to receive in your body and to just be in that experience and be fully in that experience and to receive. And I think the Empress teaches us that we have an inherent right to receive. We have an inherent right to be here and to receive. And we don't have to pass some bar. We don't have to pay money. We don't have to be this, level of spiritually or personally developed to receive. There is no barrier to entry. Receiving is an inherent right. Okay, so let's hold that for the Empress. And then with the Emperor speaks to, and again, if you haven't watched the previous two, I do recommend, because it'll give you a good broad overview of both cards. But the Emperor is again about an inherent divine right, and the Emperor is about the right to take up space, about the right to be and exist. I think it's interesting that in the major arcana order, traditionally the Empress comes first. The idea that our existence is predicated on receiving, right? When we are born, when we are little babies, when we are embodying that Aries energy of the Emperor and bursting out into the world, Lindsay Mack talks about the Emperor as the baby's first scream, the baby's first cry. When we are in that energy, we are there, we exist because we received something. Because we received, the vessel and the safety of our birthing parent. Because we're receiving care that we need as babies and that we cannot fend for ourselves. And so there is this interesting thought of like, we have to fill ourselves up just to be. Everyone needs that receiving. Everyone needs to fill up. And the other piece of the Empress, of course, is the Empress is also creative. And so in order to create, in order to burst forth with all this wild sort of Empress energy and to create art and to make things and to whatever, we first need to fill our cups up, right? We need inspiration to create. We need physical safety to create. We need to feel some degree of like emotional something. I'm not sure what to call it, to create, right? So all of these things, filling up our cup, receiving, that is an inherent right. And then we have a right to take up space. So the Emperor side of this, a right to exist, a right to be in our body. So we're coming back to the body. And that's not to say, by the way, I want to be very clear that if you dissociate, if you have experiences not being the body, if you're trans like me, living in the mind is sometimes totally a survival technique, and it is absolutely a spiritual technology, I think, of survival. Sometimes being fully embodied is not safe. Sometimes being fully embodied is not safe, but also sometimes being fully embodied doesn't feel safe when it is. So it's always kind of a good idea to check in a little bit and just to ask, like, okay, what's true in this moment? What's my brain freaking out? What's true? And you know what? If you get that wrong, it's okay. So when we're fully in our bodies, though, when we're present, and even if we're not like fully in our bodies, but when we are asserting our right to take up space, that is a divine right. Again, no matter who you are. I have noticed in myself a tendency to shrink back and try to minimize myself. And I have wrapped that tendency in the language of decentering and in the idea of decentering myself as a white person. And yet, at the same time, I can see the ways in which wanting to make myself small, wanting to pull myself out of it, both A, is not really showing up fully in the experience of being human, because it's an easy way out in some ways to try to reduce yourself, to give others space, versus actively engaging and actively engaging in creating that space for others. But also, I'm a femme person. I was raised, socialized as female. I'm trans. I have disabilities. I have a lot of disabilities that are very like feminized. And so there is also a lot of cultural and societal pressure that I maybe don't focus on as much, because I'm very focused on race and what it means to be white in this culture. At the same time, though, I can't forget the fact that I was socialized to make myself small. And those of us who are socialized, or who are femme, women, non-binary, trans, anyone who's had any experience with this kind of non-privileged gender status, probably has a little bit of this work to do in terms of the Emperor and feeling into the Emperor and like taking up space and having that right to exist. But we all deserve it. Every single gosh darn one of us, right? And so, and if you are a person who's marginalized, if you are BIPOC, if you are disabled, if you are queer, if you are trans, any of these things and many others, then it's particularly important to try. I know it's hard, sometimes society rails against it, but when we can, to be present, to be fully ourselves. And I want to link this back to neurodivergence, because as an ADHD person, one thing I've been noticing is that I both defer and make myself small and people please, but also as an ADHD person, I always feel like too much. I feel like I'm talking too much, I'm talking too fast, I'm taking up space. This was something I really wrestled with in the time I took off of social media, where my initial thought was like, pull away, like don't exist, like create this open stage for others. And I realized over time that doesn't really work. That decentering some is good, right? But that being present and then being willing to work with what's here. And this is where we'll get into the Hierophant next, because also like being in our ethics and integrity, like that's how we show up in integrity, right? It's not necessarily pulling away. It's always asking ourselves as we take up space, how are we taking up space? How are we interacting with those around us? And how are we making space for others? And I think you can do that in an active way rather than just trying to disappear. Because let's face it, like you're here, right? And we want you to be here. And so, and I think a lot of people who have ADHD and other neurodivergencies will struggle with this feeling of too muchness because the way we communicate is different. Now, I can't speak specifically to the experience of autism or the autistic spectrum, although sometimes I wonder if I may be somewhere on there. But that said, I don't really feel comfortable speaking to that experience. But I have noticed people with various neurodivergencies having this, where because we communicate differently, we can be seen as too much, we can be seen as annoying, we can be seen as, taking up too much space, etc. And if we are also dealing with this femme, female, trans, whatever it is, non-cis man existence, then I think we can really censor ourselves and feel like we're always taking up too much space. And so if this is you, I think it's a reminder that we were born the way we were, and we have developed the way we are, and we are neurodivergent, we do communicate differently. And yeah, there may be times where we're taking up more space that is ideal, and we want to be aware of that. But also, it's okay to talk, and it's okay to communicate the way you communicate. And it's okay to be there, and it's okay to be a lot. It's okay to be intense. It's okay to get excited about things. I think that there is both Empress and Emperor in that. Because again, Emperor is about taking up space, about being here, about being grounded, foundation, the number 4. But then the Empress is about wildness and creation and being who you are and authenticity and filling up in the way you fill up. And I think that there is some real neurodivergent wisdom and awesomeness in the Empress in that way, that the Empress says, I love you no matter who you are. You have a right to receive no matter who you are. You get to show up as yourself, and that's beautiful, and that's what creates good art, and that's what creates wildness, and that's what makes the kind of wild brambles that the Emperor may then structure and detangle. But you need that output, you need that just being you, and that can be Empress. And I think a practical tip with Empress is to think about love languages and how you receive. Because again, going back to my massage experience, I think we all receive in different ways, and we all feel filled up in different ways. And if you find that you feel like, I receive plenty, I get a lot, like maybe you feel guilt about someone supporting you, maybe you're on disability, maybe any number of things, that I would encourage you to work with that and to release that guilt if possible. But like, if you are feeling that way, sorry, I got a little dissociated there. If you're feeling kind of in your feels about it, and if you're feeling like I receive plenty, receiving is not a problem for me. I also had this experience with the Empress, and I just want to remind you that if you're receiving in a way that isn't filling you up, or that isn't fully filling you up, you have a right to keep receiving, and you have a right to receive in ways that work for you. And so if you think this should make me feel full, but it doesn't, or if you think this should make me feel full, but it makes me feel half full, then think about that. If you're receiving in a way that doesn't really light you up, but at the same time, you're like, oh my God, I'm receiving a lot, is that something you want to maybe change and like figure out a different way to receive? Or if you're feeling kind of half full, then keep doing that way, but let's add more. Let's think about other ways you can receive. Because we all have a need and a right to both pull in and give out, and we can't just do one. And when you do receive in the way that feels good for you, I think it can really help you to be more embodied. I think it can really help to be to move into Emperor space. And then in Emperor space, think about if you're building foundations, if you're building structures, again, and this comes back to neurodivergence, the way we receive may be different from the way neurotypicals receive, and the way we give may also be different. So with the Emperor, the way we structure things, the way we create things, the way we build foundations, the way we lead, the way we help people to come together, the way we facilitate might not look the same as it does for neurotypical people. And even if you're not neurodivergent, right, the way you personally, I'm like pointing at the camera, but you receive and the way you structure is going to be unique to you. It's something that I have realized moving into entrepreneurship is that, for the longest time I was afraid of entrepreneurship because entrepreneurship felt like the side of the Emperor that is like, I'm going to do it alone, bust out. And I wanted rules and structure. I almost wanted another Emperor to do it for me. But I realized that didn't really work because the structures of companies, and in my case, nonprofit organizations, didn't always work for me. And there were structures that I wanted to implement and I couldn't really implement in the environment, right? And so there was something really freeing about creating my own structure, me as an individual solopreneur. And I may have to adjust that if I ever get a team, but feeling that it's okay for me to structure things the way that works for me. And I think that's a great tip for folks who are neurodivergent or have disability, that if it works, great. Whatever the modality, whatever the method, whatever the tip, if you found it on TikTok, if you found it on where, it doesn't matter. Great. So if something helps you to structure and build a foundation, go for it. And if something helps you to receive and to be able to create, to be able to feel more abundant, great, do it. So I think really the message of this video is just to remind everyone that the way we experience the energies of giving, receiving, structure, Empress and Emperor are always going to be different and specific. And that the way society thinks we should experience these things is going to be through a white, neurotypical, male, etc. lens, non-disabled. And so what you need to do for you, I support, I love you, you are valid. And just as a reminder, if you enjoyed this video, if you got something out of it, I would love for you to join me in my Patreon community. I'm working on building this out more and bringing more folks in and making this more of a community where we can really reflect on collective liberation and justice, as well as our personal development through the lenses of tarot and astrology. So I'm really passionate about helping marginalized folks and others who are experiencing a desire to get into collective justice and liberation, help you to understand yourself so that you can find your role in this emerging future. So if that sounds really exciting to you, please go to patreon.com/queermagical, sign up. I have subscriptions as low as $1 and up to 20. So whatever fits your income level, I would love that. Patreon helps support free content like this so that everyone can access it. So I hope to see you there.